The chamber floated above a swirl of stars, its transparent walls curving like the inside of a colossal glass heart. Every pulse of light from the nearby nebula shimmered across the long table where the delegates of the Galactic Dominion waited. Voices in 100 languages fell silent when the High Chancellor rose, his robe glimmering with threads of bioluminescence. Behind him, banners of every member species unfurled in holographic sequence, a living spectrum of power. By unanimous decree of the Dominion Assembly, he announced, his translator projecting smooth Terran syllables, we declare the human species an existential threat to the harmony of the galaxy. The words echoed through the air like distant thunder. Around the table, alien eyes blinked, rippled, or flared depending on anatomy. Some delegates excreted clouds of colored vapor to signify satisfaction. Others emitted low-frequency growls. Only one chair remained empty, the human seat. The Chancellor paused, expecting his late adversary to burst through the doors in some fit of barbaric arrogance. Instead, there was a faint metallic click. The doors parted to reveal a single figure in a weathered dark uniform. His boots were dusty, his collar undone, and a small tin rattled in his hand. Ambassador Michael Hale looked more like a soldier lost on leave than a representative of an entire species. He scanned the gathered multitude, the faintest grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Sorry, he said. Traffic. Several translators stuttered, struggling to contextualize sarcasm. The chamber absorbed the sound of his footsteps, slow, deliberate, as he approached the empty chair and dropped into it without ceremony. A few alien aides recoiled when he propped one boot on the edge of the table. The action wasn't overtly hostile, but in a hall that measured respect through posture and protocol. It was scandalous. The Chancellor cleared his throat, a wet clicking sound. Ambassador Hale of the Terran Confederacy, he intoned, you have heard our decree. Your species has defied countless warnings, trespassed restricted systems, and refused to dismantle prohibited weapons. The Dominion can no longer tolerate humanity's lawlessness. Hale tapped the cigarette tin against the tabletop. You rehearsed that. Murmurs spread through the chamber. A crystalline being pulsed red, offended. Is this a jest? No, Hale replied, sliding a cigarette between his lips. Just wondering if you practiced in front of a mirror. The Chancellor's tendrils stiffened. Ambassador, you stand before civilizations that predate your son. Do you comprehend the gravity of your position? Oh, I do, Hale said around the cigarette. You're about to make a very bad decision. He flicked the lighter. A small flame blossomed, absurdly fragile compared to the energy fields and plasma conduits surrounding them. Every alien I turned toward it. Fire, the first technology of mankind, looked almost primitive in this place of wonders, yet it burned with a stubborn intimacy that no hologram could imitate. Hale drew in a breath, the tip glowing orange. Across the table, the Chancellor raised an appendage. Your insolence confirms our fears. The Dominion hereby declares war. Hale finished for him. He exhaled smoke that drifted upward, curling into ghostly rings before dissipating into the air filters. Yeah, I heard you the first time. A ripple of confusion swept through the assembly. Protocol dictated that the accused beg for mercy, offer concessions, at least acknowledge the inevitability of defeat. Instead, the humans simply leaned back, studying the stars beyond the transparent wall as if measuring them for something. A reptilian general hissed. Do you grasp what this means? Every fleet, every world will rise against you. Hale's gaze drifted back to him. You sure about that? The translator hesitated, then repeated the words verbatim. The phrase echoed strangely, half challenge, half invitation. The general recoiled, uncertain if he had been threatened or mocked. The Chancellor tried to recover the rhythm of ceremony. Your defiance will doom your species. The Dominion commands overwhelming superiority in numbers, technology, and experience. You cannot win. Maybe not, Hale said softly, but you'll remember us. For a heartbeat. No one moved. The faint hum of the station's core filled the silence. Then the ambassador rose, pocketed his lighter, and brushed a bit of ash from his sleeve. "Well, gentlemen, ladies, assorted forms of life, I suppose that's settled. You cannot simply leave," the Chancellor shouted. "Hostilities commence immediately." "Already did," Hale murmured. He looked down at the glowing end of his cigarette, as if consulting it for advice. "The moment you said the word war, everything changed. You just don't see it yet." A sphere of living gas fluttered its membranes, releasing a scent of disbelief. "You threaten us with philosophy?" "I'm reminding you," Hale said, "that humans don't start fights to win. They start them because someone told them they couldn't." He turned toward the exit. Guards tensed but received no order to stop him. There was something unnerving about his calmness, as though the entire Dominion assembly had already lost control of the script. The door slid open, spilling harsh white light across the polished floor. Before stepping through, Hale paused and looked back. The Chancellor's eyes, dozens of them, glared in collective fury. Hale took one last drag and let the smoke roll from his mouth in lazy spirals. "You know," he said, "I actually came hoping for peace. But if you're set on war, fine. Just don't complain later about the mess." He dropped the cigarette to the floor and crushed it under his boot. The faint crackle echoed like a gunshot in the silence. When the doors closed behind him, the delegates erupted. Accusations, translation errors, cultural analyses collided in a storm of panic and outrage. The High Chancellor struck the table with a trembling appendage. "He mocks us," he roared. "This insolent primate mocks the Dominion." Yet beneath the anger, threads of unease wove through the crowd. Somewhere in their collective memory lingered ancient cautionary tales about small, aggressive species that refused to know their limits. The Dominion had tamed worlds, erased rebellions, crushed empires, but never had it faced an enemy that laughed in the face of extinction. In the empty corridor, Hale walked alone, the echo of his boots swallowed by the station's hum. He retrieved another cigarette, turned it between his fingers, and smiled faintly at the irony. Humanity's entire fate balanced on the flick of a lighter. Behind him, the most powerful coalition in the galaxy had just declared war, convinced of its own inevitability. Ahead of him waited a tiny shuttle, a handful of fellow diplomats, and the distant blue speck they all called home. He lit the new cigarette and drew in the smoke, savoring its burn. It wasn't bravado. It was ritual, a small defiance against the infinite. Through the viewport at the corridor's end, stars stretched like scattered embers across the dark. For the first time that day, Hale allowed a trace of weariness to surface in his eyes. "Guess we're doing this again," he muttered. The shuttle doors opened, bathing him in warm interior light. He stepped inside without looking back. Far behind, in the grand chamber of the Dominion, 1,000 alien voices argued over strategy, vengeance, and protocol. None of them realized they had already lost the only battle that mattered, the battle for fear. As the shuttle detached and fell away into the sea of stars, Hale exhaled smoke that drifted through the cabin's filtered air like a fading flag. Somewhere, deep in the Dominion's core systems, alarms were already beginning to sound. The cigarette glowed once more, a tiny, defiant sun in the darkness. The shuttle's descent through the thin haze of Earth's upper atmosphere trembled with quiet violence, the hull whispering under the friction. Ambassador Michael Hale sat alone near the viewport, cigarette unlit between his fingers, staring at the pale arc of the planet below. It looked smaller than he remembered, crowded, scarred, and stubbornly alive. From this distance, it could have been mistaken for peace. He knew better. The transmission from the Dominion replayed in his mind, the Chancellor's voice like oil over metal. The declaration of war had already spread through the Dominion networks and leaked into human space. There would be panic, speculation, and then, inevitably, resolve. Humanity had always been predictable in that way, frightened first, furious second. A faint tone drew his attention to the seat opposite him. Colonel Yara Jensen, liaison to the Terran Defense Council, studied him through sharp eyes. "You really told them to go to hell?" she asked. Hale smiled without humor. "More or less." She folded her arms. You do realize that speech cost us the only chance at negotiation? There was no chance, he said. They made up their minds long before I walked into that room. They just wanted to see if we'd kneel first. Jensen exhaled through her nose, half in irritation, half in reluctant agreement. She was a soldier, born into an age where humanity's borders were measured in mining colonies and survival rates. Her faith lay in numbers and steel. Hale's, however, was older, rooted in the quiet certainty that humans fought hardest when logic failed. You think we can actually fight them? She asked, breaking the silence. I think we don't have a choice, Hale replied. And that makes us dangerous. The shuttle touched down at the New Geneva Spire, a gleaming tower built over the ruins of the old United Nations complex. When the doors hissed open, warm air flooded in, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. Reporters shouted from beyond the cordon, their drones buzzing like metallic insects. Hale ignored them and stepped into the gray daylight, his coat catching the wind. Inside the spire, the air changed, cooler, sterilized, humming with the energy of countless data lines. Screens filled the walls, broadcasting alerts and projections. The council chamber was already full. Leaders, scientists, generals, even a few philosophers, each bearing the same expression of strained disbelief. When Hale entered, the noise softened. The council chair, an elderly woman named Miriam Kade, gestured for him to speak. Her eyes, clouded yet sharp, held no accusation, only fatigue. Ambassador, she said, we've received confirmation. The Dominion fleets are mobilizing. You were present at the declaration. We'd like your assessment. Hale took a long breath. They believe they're gods, he said simply, and they think we're a mistake that needs correcting. A murmur rippled through the chamber. One of the scientists leaned forward. Their numbers are overwhelming. Our fleets won't match theirs, Hale interrupted gently. But numbers don't win wars. Well, does? A young counselor frowned. That sounds poetic, not strategic. Poetry, Hale said, lighting a cigarette despite the room's air regulations, is just strategy in disguise. It tells people what they're fighting for when logic runs out. Smoke curled upward, gray against the sterile white ceiling. Jensen stood in the back, watching him with the wary respect soldiers reserve for men who speak like philosophers but think like killers. Hale continued, pacing slowly. They see us as irrational, chaotic. They're right, but that's our strength. Every empire that tried to predict us ended up choking on its own certainty. We don't fight fair, we don't die quiet, and we never stay where we're told. Miriam's voice trembled slightly. You're suggesting defiance over diplomacy? I'm suggesting survival, Hale said. Diplomacy only works when both sides believe the other deserves to exist. The Dominion doesn't. For a moment, no one spoke. The faint hum of the spire's generators filled the silence like a heartbeat. Finally, Miriam nodded. Then we prepare. As Hale left the chamber, Jensen followed him into the corridor. Rain streaked down the glass walls, distorting the city's reflection below. You talk like you've already accepted the end, she said quietly. I've accepted the cost, he replied. There's a difference. She studied him, uncertain whether to admire or condemn his calm. You were in the Europa campaign, weren't you? He stopped. The corridor lights glinted against his face, revealing the faint scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. Long time ago, he said. They say you ordered an orbital drop on your own position. They say a lot of things. Jensen's gaze hardened. Was it true? He met her eyes. We were surrounded. No reinforcements. No options. Sometimes you make peace with the fire instead of waiting for it to burn you. She didn't press further. The air between them thickened with the quiet understanding of two people who had seen too much. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon, echoing against the tower's shell. That night, in the solitude of his quarters, Hale sat by the window, watching lightning scatter across the clouds. The world below pulsed with energy, ships launching, factories igniting, communications weaving the planet into one nervous heartbeat. Humanity was waking up. He opened a drawer and pulled out a photograph, creased, faded, nearly erased by time. It showed a younger version of himself with a woman and a child standing by a riverside. He stared at it until the image blurred. He had long since learned that purpose often came at the expense of peace. The intercom chimed softly. "Ambassador Hale," came Jensen's voice, filtered through static. "The Defense Council has approved emergency mobilization. Command wants you to brief the fleet captains at dawn." "Copy that," he said. He hesitated, then added, "Jensen, thanks." "For what?" "For still believing we can win." The line clicked off. Hale leaned back, cigarette glowing faintly in the dim light. The smoke drifted toward the ceiling like ghosts leaving a battlefield. In the Dominion's archives, humanity was likely already listed under hostile entities. In the Council's databases, he was probably categorized as asset, diplomatic, unstable. But in the mirror before him, he saw something simpler. A tired man carrying the weight of a reckless species that refused to die quietly. He thought again of the Chancellor's expression when he'd lit that first cigarette, the subtle widening of alien eyes and used to Defiance. It hadn't been anger he saw. It was confusion. They had never encountered a creature that treated annihilation like an inconvenience. Hale stubbed the cigarette out on the metal edge of the table and stood. Outside, the storm intensified, rain hammering against glass like impatient fingers. Tomorrow would begin the preparations, the speeches, the quiet panic. But tonight, for one brief moment, he allowed himself to feel the gravity of it. The absurdity that a single man's tone of voice had sent an entire galaxy into war. He walked back to the window. The lights of the city reflected in his eyes like distant stars. Humanity was fractured, outnumbered, underarmed, but not undone. For all their flaws, humans had one unshakable gift. They didn't understand when to surrender. Hale smiled faintly at his own reflection. "You sure about that?" he whispered, repeating the words that had already become legend. Beyond the clouds, invisible to the naked eye, Dominion fleets drifted through the void, assembling like a storm front across the edge of known space. Hale didn't need to see them to feel their approach. He simply turned from the window, retrieved his coat, and prepared for dawn. The cigarette tin clicked shut in his pocket as he left the room. The sound was small, almost insignificant, yet in that moment it felt like the ticking of a clock counting down to something irreversible. Tomorrow, the war would begin in earnest. Tonight, the world held its breath. The void between stars shimmered with the faint reflections of metal and intent. The Dominion's fleets, disciplined and vast, stretched across the black like a living net. Each ship gleamed with precision. Flawless formations, synchronized trajectories, perfect silence before annihilation. The order had been given. The human system was to be purged, its resistance erased before it had time to breathe. For the Dominion, this was routine, another correction of cosmic imbalance. For humanity, it was Judgment Day. Michael Hale stood on the command deck of the Terran flagship Resolute, watching the holographic projections swirl around him. Lines of light represented fleet positions, flashing red where contact was inevitable. The Dominion's vanguard was minutes away from entering the outer edges of soul space. Around him, the crew moved with quiet urgency. No panic, only the sharp focus of those who knew the odds and chose to fight anyway. Colonel Yara Jensen stood beside him, her uniform immaculate despite the fatigue shadowing her eyes. "Telemetry confirms multiple capital-class warships entering the belt," she reported. "They're not wasting time." "They think this will be quick," Hale replied, his tone almost thoughtful. "It won't be." She studied him, uneasy. "Do you actually believe we can stop them?" "I don't believe in stopping them," he said, gaze fixed on the expanding red arcs of enemy advance. "I believe in making them regret starting." He turned to the communications officer. "Signal the fleet. Initiate contingency atlas." The officer hesitated. "Sir, atlas is untested." "Everything is untested," Hale said. "Send it." A flurry of confirmations echoed through the command deck. Across the solar system, hundreds of hidden stations came to life. Artificial asteroids split open, revealing buried engines and magnetic accelerators. Hale watched the data feed stabilizing, his reflection faintly visible in the screen. Eyes cold, shoulders straight, a man who had run out of patience for gods. Moments later, the Dominion fleet emerged from warp. The void flared white as 1,000 energy signatures ignited. Their lead vessel, a cathedral of polished metal and graviton spires, advanced with regal precision. The Dominion's commander, a being of glass and light, spoke through subspace relays, its voice projected directly onto the Resolute's bridge. This is your final moment of awareness, human vessels. You may surrender your systems for mercy. Hale leaned against the console, cigarette dangling from his fingers. You keep offering mercy to people who never asked for it, he said. Maybe that's why you don't understand us. Without ceremony, he flicked the cigarette into the disposal chute. Fire Atlas. The asteroid belt exploded. Thousands of rock fragments transformed into guided projectiles, each carrying electromagnetic warheads scavenged from every forgotten era of human warfare. The Dominion's front line vanished in flashes of light and static. Their formations buckled as command ships lost contact. The holographic display filled with interference, the Dominion's perfect symmetry fracturing into chaos. Direct hits across sectors 3 through 9, Jensen reported, her voice clipped but trembling with disbelief. We actually caught them off guard. Good, Hale said. Let's make them stay that way. He moved to the tactical table, issuing commands faster than the aides could relay them. Human ships scattered instead of forming defensive lines, each captain improvising with grim creativity. Some dragged asteroids behind them using magnetic tethers. Others powered down completely, drifting cold and silent until they were close enough to strike. Chaos, to the Dominion, looked like incompetence. To Hale, it was evolution. The enemy regrouped quickly. Energy lances tore through the dark, carving molten trails across space. One by one, smaller Terran vessels winked out. Hale felt each loss as a subtle weight pressing against his chest, but didn't flinch. They're adapting, Jensen warned. Their AI's learning our patterns. Then we stop giving it patterns, Hale replied. Order Captain Ruiz to initiate the blackout protocol. The lights across the fleet dimmed as encrypted comms shut down. Every ship went silent. For several long minutes, the battle devolved into ghosts chasing ghosts, radar shadows, false signals, silent explosions. Dominion algorithms struggled to comprehend a fight without logic. Jensen stepped closer. We'll lose coordination. We already have, Hale said. That's the point. Through the viewport, fragments of burning hulls drifted past like dying stars. He thought of the council chamber, of Miriam Kade's calm resignation, and wondered if she'd expected it to happen this fast. Maybe she had. Maybe that's why she'd chosen him. Not to win, but to make the war unforgettable. The Resolute shuddered under impact. A Dominion cruiser had locked on and was closing fast, its hull glowing with the eerie blue of antimatter charge. Hale steadied himself, eyes narrowing. Helm, bring us around. Full thrust. Jensen's hand gripped the railing. That's suicide. Not if we aim right. The ship twisted violently, engines roaring. Hale watched the Dominion vessel loom larger on the display until it filled the screen. On my mark, he said. 3, 2. A sudden flare burst from below, a Terran destroyer intercepting the cruiser head-on. Both ships vanished in a bloom of light that washed across the Resolute's hull. The crew steadied themselves against the shockwave. Jensen exhaled shakily. That was Ruiz. Hale didn't answer. His jaw tightened as he studied the cascading data, casualty projections, resource losses, and yet, still, the Dominion advance had slowed. He knew what he was signing up for. Doesn't make it easier, she said. No, he agreed quietly, but it makes it matter. The Dominion fleet began to fall back, reconfiguring their assault pattern. Hale recognized the maneuver. It wasn't retreat, it was recalibration. They'll return stronger, he murmured. They're learning faster than expected. Jensen folded her arms. So do we. Hale's gaze softened for a heartbeat. You almost sound like me. Someone has to when you're not around, she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He looked out at the dark horizon where debris shimmered in distant sunlight. The first battle was technically a victory, if survival counted as victory. Yet Hale felt none of the relief that should have followed. Humanity had drawn blood, yes, but the Dominion now understood what they were dealing with. The next encounter would not be so forgiving. Status on a Martian outpost? He asked. Partial contact, Jensen said. They're digging in. Ground units report heavy bombardment, but morale's high. Keep it that way, Hale said. Fear spreads faster than truth. So keep the story simple. First contact, first strike, first win. Even if it's not entirely true, especially then. A flicker of static interrupted the comms, a broken voice emerging from the noise. This is Captain Delane of the Kestrel. Reporting, Dominion retreating beyond orbital range. Casualties high but manageable. Copy that, Kestrel, Hale replied. You've done well. Regroup at the fallback point. The line went silent again. Around them, the hum of the ship settled into uneasy quiet. Outside, the wreckage of two civilizations floated together in a slow spiral, shattered steel mingling with alien alloys, drifting toward the pull of the sun. Jensen's voice softened. What now? Hale reached into his coat, retrieved his cigarette tin, and turned it over in his hand. Now, he said, we remind them that we don't scare easy. He lit one, the small flame trembling in the recycled air. Through the viewport, the stars gleamed like old promises, cold, unreachable, but still burning. He took a slow drag, exhaled, and let the smoke curl upward like a quiet prayer for the dead. In the distance, Dominion ships vanished into folds of light, retreating beyond the system's edge. The silence that followed was heavier than victory, deeper than loss. Hale stared after them, expression unreadable. Round one, he whispered, voice low enough that only he could hear it. Your move. The stars hung motionless, distant witnesses to a war that no longer respected boundaries of physics or reason. Weeks had passed since the first clash, and though the Dominion's retreat had given humanity a breath, it was a shallow one. The silence that followed victory was not peace, it was recalibration. Every fleet, every surviving station, every soldier felt it, the anticipation of something vast and final. On the command deck of the Resolute, Captain Michael Hale stood alone, staring at a rotating hologram of the solar system. Red markers pulsed like open wounds. The Dominion's forces had not vanished. They had reorganized beyond the Oort cloud, building something enormous, something that eclipsed logic. Hale had been in constant motion since the battle, sleeping in fragments, surviving on bitter coffee and the fading edge of adrenaline. The worst showed in his eyes, but not in his posture. Colonel Yara Jensen approached, her boots silent against the floor. Recon drones confirm it, sir. They're constructing a relay gate the size of a moon. It's a full invasion corridor. Hale nodded slightly. How long before it's operational? 3 days, maybe less. He didn't look at her, only at the glowing lines of the gate as they pulsed in simulated rhythm. Then that's 3 days to remind them who they're dealing with. She hesitated. We've lost nearly half our fleet, Michael. Supply lines are fractured. The colonies are bleeding. You can't fight an empire with ghosts. He turned then, eyes cold but alive with a strange conviction. You're right, but ghosts are what haunt empires. Jensen wanted to argue, but there was a gravity in his voice that silenced her. She handed him a data slate. The council wants evacuation protocols prepared. They think it's time to preserve what's left. Hale took the slate, skimmed it, and set it aside without reading further. Tell the council that humanity doesn't retreat from its own home. You think they'll listen? I think they'll do what they always do, calculate losses and call it wisdom. He walked to the viewport, where Earth hung below like a fragile coin. We're done being reasonable. Hours later, the command deck buzzed with quiet coordination. The Resolute's crew moved like a single organism, exhausted, disciplined, and burning with purpose. Hale watched them work, memorizing faces. He knew many would not live to see the next dawn. When the transmission came, The voice that filled the room was neither human nor mechanical. It was too calm, too precise. Captain Michael Hale, the Dominion extends one final chance. Surrender your world, and your species will be integrated into the Dominion order. Resistance will ensure your extinction. Hale leaned on the console, unlit cigarette rolling between his fingers. You keep making the same mistake, he said. You think survival is all we want. There was a pause. Then the Dominion voice, curious, what else is there? He lit the cigarette, inhaled, and exhaled toward the projection. Living. The transmission ended abruptly. No reply, just the steady hum of the ship and the faint crackle of burning tobacco. 3 hours later, the fleet began to mobilize. Every ship that could still fly took formation, surrounding the Resolute like a constellation of iron and defiance. Old cargo haulers were retrofitted with explosives. Mining vessels became improvised weapons. Hale's orders were simple. Draw the Dominion to Saturn's orbit and make it cost them everything. As the ships accelerated outward, Hale walked the lower decks, meeting crew members face to face. A mechanic with grease-streaked hands saluted him. A medic offered a silent nod. Each gesture carried the same understanding. This was not a fight for victory, but for memory. When he reached the observation bay, Jensen was waiting, helmet under her arm. So this is it, she said. He gave a faint smile. You sound disappointed. I was hoping the galaxy would end with a little more ceremony. He chuckled, low and tired. This is ceremony enough. The fleet emerged from Saturn's shadow, just as the Dominion arrived. The alien armada filled the dark like a storm, ships glimmering with pale energy. At their center loomed the relay gate, half-constructed yet already pulsing with power. It radiated menace and inevitability. Hale's voice cut across every comm channel. This is Captain Michael Hale of the Terran Defense Fleet. The Dominion believes we're outnumbered, outmatched, out of time. They're right about all of it. But they forgot one thing: we're still here. And that's enough. The human fleet surged forward. Engines flared, weapons roared, and space itself seemed to twist under the pressure of desperation. The Dominion met them with relentless precision. Beams of light carved through the void, tearing apart hulls like paper. But humanity didn't fight to survive, they fought to hurt. Every explosion, every collision, every reckless act chipped away at the Dominion's perfection. The Resolute charged headlong into the formation, its shields flickering. Target the gate's power nexus, Hale ordered. Sir, if we detonate that close, Jensen began. I know. He met her eyes. It's the only way they stop. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. Then let's make it count. The ship plunged through the chaos. Dominion vessels converged, surrounding them like predators. Energy blasts tore across the hull. Fires bloomed along the corridors. The Resolute's engine screamed, but they held. Hale stood firm, hands gripping the rail. Arm the core. Manual detonation only. Jensen's hands shook as she keyed the override. We won't have time to escape. We were never going to, he said softly. But maybe Earth will. A Dominion transmission broke through, sharp and cold. You choose annihilation? Hale took one last drag from his cigarette, smoke curling around the command lights. No, he said. I choose Defiance. He pressed the control. The explosion was not a sound, but a bloom of light that swallowed darkness itself. The Resolute became a star, its core ripping through the relay gate in a cascade of energy that shattered the Dominion's link. The gate imploded, dragging half the enemy fleet into its collapse. Silence followed, a silence that stretched across systems. On Earth, the night sky brightened briefly as the last light of the Resolute flared and faded. Reports trickled in. Dominion signals gone, their invasion halted. No one could say if they would return, but humanity had survived another day. Weeks later, a message reached the surviving colonies. A recording recovered from the Resolute's last transmission cycle. Hale's voice, calm and steady. If you're hearing this, it means we bought you time. Don't waste it building walls. Build something worth defending. Remember what it cost to stay human. Jensen's voice followed, faint but clear. They'll be back someday, but so will we. The transmission ended with a soft burst of static, like an exhale. Years later, when children on Mars asked their teachers how humanity survived the Dominion War, the answer was always the same. Because one man lit a cigarette and refused to bow. And somewhere beyond the veil of broken stars, the remnants of the Dominion watched, recalculating. Not in fear, but in respect. Humanity, against all odds, had taught them something no algorithm could predict: what it meant to be alive.